I'm going to call the school committee meeting to order at 8:01 for the purposes of interviews for the position of superintendent of schools. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we are here this evening with our first candidate, Nan Skiff Murphy, and we have questions prepared, and I think we'll just get going. And I have the first question. So,
great.
If you could tell us why you're seeking the superintendency here in Marlborough, and what is it about both your skill set and our district that makes you think that it's the right fit for us?
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me. First, I want to start by saying I've had a fabulous day. I've been here since 8:30 this morning, and every single minute I've spent in the district I've enjoyed. And the people have been warm, welcoming. Both students, staff, families, and community members have greeted me with lots of good questions and just a genuine interest in making sure their district moved forward in a positive way. So thank you. I've enjoyed every minute I've been here. As far as what brings me to Marlborough is I am currently serving in a district as an assistant superintendent of teaching and learning that doesn't have a broad range of student need. And that's my realm of expertise, is working with students that speak second language, working with students that are in populations where they're high economically disadvantaged families that are looking for educational experts to really make sure their students are propelled and prepared for the future. So I want to return to a district. I spent close to 12 years in Lowell, Massachusetts as a principal and as the director of accountability and school improvement, and that's where I found the most rewarding work happen for myself. And although I'm grateful to the community of Marblehead and for the experiences I've gained in a suburban community, I'm looking to return to a more diverse community where my skills in leading and in putting in important structures and systems in place for all students, both academically gifted and those that may have academic challenges as well. So that's what brings me here.
Great, thank you.
Were there two parts to that?
Well, what was it about Marlborough that was appealing to you?
Okay.
Was there anything other that you wanted to add about that?
Sure. I have done my research and come to understand that Marlborough is really positioned well in terms of funding and priorities for students and teachers. It is positioned well in terms of staffing. I have heard throughout the district today that the supports are in place, that we are a district that prioritizes making sure that teachers and students have everything they need to be successful. And that's not always the case in districts, and sometimes that sets the work back when you're not, when you don't have the resources at the ready. So that's another appealing factor to me. I'll also share that I've spent my time watching some school committee meetings to just understand the dynamic of potential colleagues and the agendas brought forward through school committee and the conversations and the focus on kids and things that are happening in school is something that I value and I appreciate about this committee. And so that was another, because the role of superintendent is an important, having a school committee that works well together and wants to problem solve together is an important component. And so that's another piece that brings me to the district as a candidate.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Dan.
Up to me. Well, student learning is obviously paramount to the success of any district. That's why we're all here. And with that said, identifying learning targets, measuring student growth, and determining responsibility for success continues to obviously be debated across the Commonwealth. Would you please share with us your thoughts on how districts should hold themselves accountable for academic progress improvement and what steps should be taken when benchmarks are not met. This is obviously in addition to anything the state may require us to do as well.
Of course. So accountability data can be really telling and insightful, but more importantly, it's the data you collect on a daily basis in schools. And by talking with teachers, by looking at student work, by giving time to teachers, for teachers to look at data consistently and to plan differently based on what they see. So in terms of using information to plan for improvement, I think it needs to be to some degree triangulated and use what the state provides you, but also have a systematic approach in schools where people are consistently looking at data and trying to determine where kids are and how we need to change our instruction, both for our students that are already meeting standards, because we have kids that are sitting in front of us that need more academic rigor, and then there's kids sitting in front of us every day that need it to be scaffolded and presented in a different way. So I think in order to plan for higher student achievement and plan for growth in accountability data, we need to pay attention to what's happening right now today in schools and not wait for end of the year reports to go back through. It's already, those kids are in different places by the time we get that accountability data. We need to be using our own internal systems to look at how kids are doing and to remediate and advance our instruction.
Could you expound a bit on the internal systems? What types of things would you, in your own professional experience, have you used?
Sure. So some districts have a common assessment tool. There's lots of different vendors out there. We in Marblehead right now and in Lowell, we used iReady, which is an online assessment tool. It's aligned to the state standards, and you implement 3 times a year. You assess students, K through however far into the educational career you choose to purchase. And so the students take the test based on standards that are appropriately aligned to when they fall in the curriculum, and then teachers are able to look and see who's already meeting those standards, who's almost there, and who is significantly behind, and how do we help those kids. So that's one data source. It's helpful when all schools are using the same tool, so that when your middle school principal receives the students, they have a common data understanding, and they can read that data and know about that student. So that's one example. There's also really strategic ways of teachers working together to look at student work, and that's often underestimated in terms of how powerful that can be. But teams developing rubrics and being able to use a rubric to look at a piece of student writing and say, how close is this student to the standard we're teaching, and and then I've seen teachers sort in piles the kids that are there, kids that need more help, and what kids that are on the radar for a different kind of support. And so you're kind of looking at piles on an ongoing basis and saying, okay, most of our first graders are there with this particular standard. How are we going to address these other kiddos that aren't quite there? So there's also a lot of districts that are really taking a structured approach in terms of using protocols that are where they bring in outside providers, and they'll give an assessment, and then they'll bring teams together to discuss the assessment and use a protocol for teachers to unpack those results. So there's a variety of different ways. It's, in my professional opinion, important to use a variety. I think when people hang their hats on just accountability data and looking at reports at the end of the year, that makes it hard to plan for the future, because the kids in some cases have already gone on to another school.
Great, thank you.
Tell us about your experience working with children and families who don't look like you, or speak your language, or do not have the economic advantages that you do. How have these experiences shaped your view of public education and its mission?
Great. So I, having served in Lowell for many years, I'm accustomed to working with students that don't look like me and don't speak my language. But I'll tell you, as a learner, I know better now than I did even then through my work around cultural proficiency. And I would have done things differently now that I know better and know differently how to engage with families and the importance around understanding culture. So I will tell you that the importance when you're working in a diverse community of making sure when you're communicating that you're doing it in a way that people can understand you regardless of what language they speak. So that if you're putting out information, it's in the languages that parents need to receive it in. That if you are hosting a public event, that you have interpreters available to engage parents with questions and be able to navigate conversations with their superintendent or their principals. Being able to understand the cultures by attending really important cultural pivotal moments in students' lives that are anchored in their religion or in the way they celebrate as a family. And so being present in those and learning more about the cultures, honoring when kids, for example, we had students that celebrated Ramadan, and we would have to plan our MCAS testing around Ramadan because part of the celebration is withholding yourself from eating foods, and we certainly didn't want students working under those kinds of conditions. So I think it's about being better all the time, and we can't know everything in every moment, but learning from my experiences, learning from the work that we're doing in Marblehead and the work I've done with other superintendents around diversity, equity, and inclusion, certainly been eye-opening and made me more cognizant of access for all and all families to me as a leader.
All right. What are your strategies for fostering a positive relationship with the school committee regarding making educational policy for the district, setting budget priorities and formal spending plans, and engaging in collective bargaining, as well as creating a solid administrative and policy-making team that supports the district's goals and objectives?
Okay. I want to make sure I hit all of that, so please let me know if I don't.
No problem.
I'm going to start with building relationships and making sure that we all have a professional understanding of priorities. And I think the more aligned we are as a team, the smoother the conversations moving forward. And so we're constantly, I know the Massachusetts Association of School Committees comes in with new superintendents and works with your transition with your school committee, and oftentimes does a summer retreat and helps you build some of those frameworks together. How do we communicate? How are we going to partner? What are some of the priorities we want to focus on together? And then connecting policies to that work. So now we know what these strategies and priorities are going to be for us as a new team. When we look at policies, what's missing and what might we need to change to be in alignment so we get our work done that we're hoping to do? Is there anything kind of setting in our way of moving forward with certain things? Certainly looking and learning as a new superintendent around the work that the school committee has done over the course of even the last 3 years with the superintendent and going back even further, and coming to you with an understanding of where you've been so that you don't feel like you're constantly having to explain certain things, but that my role would be to get up to speed so that I can enter into the work with you without too much of a deficit of what's happened in the past. A lot of work has happened in this district, and it would be on me to be able to enter into conversations with you about that work without you having to slow down and explain it and to go over that with me. I'd certainly enter into I like those conversations to be part of my learning, but I wouldn't expect it to be all the way that I get there. So policies, working together, what else did we have on that?
Budget priorities and formal spending plans.
Okay, so I'm fiscally conservative. I have always been that way as a leader. I always look for how we can do things differently as opposed to what can come in and change things for us, because I think I've said this to staff today. The answer is often in the room, and bringing more money in doesn't solve the problems. Sometimes your best problem is solved by people changing their way of thinking about something or being open to do something different. And a new program can't do that for you. You can't bring new programs in and have teachers shift their thinking. It's when they're engaged in the process that they shift their thinking. A lot of fiscal decisions I've seen are made, and they're made, one, without teacher input. And so I can tell you from experience, those decisions don't stick. Teachers need to be engaged in developing district budget priorities. There needs to be a process for them to help feed information to their school leaders, who then, are part of the collaborative process with the central office team. But everybody's voice needs to be kind of included in that process. So I think that would be really important as far as developing priorities. And then I think also budget priorities need to be sustainable. It's not fiscally responsible to purchase something or buy into something, and then once that money runs out or once the training is done, then we move on to something else. There really has to be in your budgetary planning, how does this, once this has been funded, how is it going to be sustained? So that's an important part of my budgeting process and thinking around that.
Actually,
Okay.
can I do a quick follow-up on that one? Yeah.
Certainly.
In the unlikely event, because this hasn't happened, we're lucky here in the cities, we've told you, that something happens, something required a sudden change in spending habits, unexpected expense, or a budget shortfall we didn't plan on. How would you look at that if it was the middle of the year, let's say, and you needed to now basically redo the budget in your head for the rest of the year? How would you go about prioritizing and looking at your expenditures for the rest of the year, knowing that things were not going to be the way they were when you started looking at them at the beginning of the year?
So I think the first question is what needs to be eliminated that isn't student facing. So holding sacred everything that kids come in contact with, that always should be a priority, and making sure that kids have what they need in terms of instructional materials, staffing, supports, and then so look at it through that lens in terms of what could maybe be taken off that isn't going to affect students. And then it would be talking with building principals and looking at the budget collaboratively, because a superintendent can't understand certain requests and take things out of a budget without processing how that's going to affect a school. I've been on the receiving end of decisions like that as a principal, and it's very frustrating because I've learned principals don't ask for much, and when they do, typically it's important to them as a priority. So having a conversation, it may be a collaborative approach where I can pull this out of the budget, but we're going to do this at the middle school, and then next budget cycle we'll ask for this for our elementary schools, and kind of working together as a team to look at items and prioritize together.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you, yeah.
What I did was I jumped in too early, so I apologize for that, Michelle.
Okay.
I didn't really
so
steal your question.
The next
But
question is pretty much what you just answered.
yeah, I'm so sorry.
So I'm gonna mix it up and throw in a new one that I thought of after we
apologize.
came
I'm
up with
sorry.
our questions.
I didn't follow the rules, sorry.
That's okay. Can you talk about like the social emotional piece? We know that the country is still reeling, coming through this pandemic,
Yep.
which has exacerbated the social emotional needs of our students and our faculty and our families. I don't really have a question prepared, but
Okay, well, I will.
that's where I'm going.
Again, this has come up across my day today
Yeah.
in talking with principals and with teachers and with some of our parents today. The social and emotional toll of the last couple of years has been really hard. And what we need to do is deepen, and I imagine some of this work has already happened, and I've seen it in some of the work that I've read about Marlborough, but we need to deepen our understanding of trauma-sensitive schools, because a year of isolation is trauma. It's trauma for adults, and it's trauma for students. And we need to think about some of the ways that we hold kids accountable for work outside of the academic day differently. I know some parents that I've had forums with are expressing that homework is becoming a real challenge because kids just need time when they get home to decompress or to play with peers because it's been delayed. These activities have been delayed. So we've talked with teachers about where can you make some changes in homework assignments and how can we make those homework assignments maybe collaborative assignments that kids do with each other, start maybe in school and end in home in a collaborative sense, whether it's in a Google Classroom, a Google Meet, so that they're engaged. With social emotional learning, there are, just like academic learning, vastly different needs. And so you have to really be thinking about what different people and different kids need, and then think about where are those resources. The high school level is beyond exploding with students needing additional support from adults. It's gravely concerning how many kids are talking about self-harm and contemplating, life-altering decisions. These are kids that principals have said they've never had issues with in school and that have always been well-adjusted students. So we have a challenge in front of us, and when we talk about pandemic recovery, we'll recover academically. I have no question about that. We can do that. It's really being able to navigate the social emotional piece and figuring out where people are, because we're in vastly different places. We have overtaxed mental health providers. That is one of the areas that I could see when we talk about budgets changing on a dime. I wonder if in a year or two we're going to be faced over the Commonwealth with how are we going to manage what we're seeing in schools with behaviors and with social emotional needs. So I think it's about making time for kids to be able to decompress and have relationships with their teachers. And we prioritized that when we came back into in-person learning in Marblehead. We strongly encouraged that academics took a backseat, and that it was all about relationships when kids came back in. How, even though you're distanced, how are kids getting to know each other? How are they getting to know you? How are you building relationships of trust with kids so they can reach out to you if they need to? And also with families, because a lot of families are struggling in private with students that are in need. And so how do parents know where to go and who to talk to in the schools to get support for kids that maybe we don't see having behaviors in school? So it's a broad issue. It's important that it's anchored in trauma, because this has been traumatic. There's a CASEL framework, which is a social emotional framework that is widely used in schools, and we should be referring and refreshing teachers' knowledge of that framework and understanding of how kids demonstrate their needs. Behavior is a communication. So when you see an uprise in student behavior, the students are trying to communicate with the adults, something's not right, and I need something different. So even the way we look at behavior is going to have to change a little bit. Also, just making supports really transparent for kids. I've been in a district where they have QR codes where the student in high school can actually hold their phone up to a QR code poster, and it will tell them what counselor is available at what time in their school. It has to be that accessible to kids. We have to really be able to provide the path to help. And schools oftentimes have done that in guidance offices, and we need to get guidance in the cafeterias. We need to get teachers at the table. We need to get school adjustment people engaged in the hallways so that there's opportunity for students to get support and help. It's a complex question. It's one that no one person's going to be able to answer. It needs to be a commitment that stakeholders make to really support families through this time.
Great, thank you.
It's me again.
Denise?
All right. Tell us about the experience you have had with collective bargaining. What is the best role for the superintendent, and what do you view as the role of the school committee in collective bargaining?
So speaking from experience, I have never been in the collective bargaining official process. When we onboarded in Marblehead, we came to a very swift contract negotiation. We had a very honorable MOU, and we partnered with the union leadership in a really positive way. So what could have ended up being a contentious situation was very swift and smooth. The role of the superintendent in that work is to really understand and be able to articulate to the school committee members what the union leadership is referring to in layman's terms, because I know sometimes it's hard and complex in terms of language that we use as educators and what we want, prep periods, and those kinds of things. I think the superintendent is to work and partner with the school committee in that work. But my intention is I always go into negotiations or thinking about negotiations with positive intent. Teachers want to do the best they can, and they are a really professional, valued resource to the community and to the city of Marlborough. We couldn't do what we do without them, and they so contracts need to be fair and need to represent and honor the work that they do, but we also have to fund what kids need, and so there has to be a balance. So I would, as a superintendent, be actively interested in the conversations that the school committee is having with the union and be part of those conversations and support a mutually, hopefully, agreeable resolution.
I have a follow-up on that.
Yeah, good.
So it's kind of along the same lines, but where you haven't had the contentious experience with collective bargaining. What about in either an evaluation scenario or something else like that, where it's become adversarial, and how have you handled it?
Okay, so and this came up during my conversation in the forum with teachers today, evaluation and kind of teachers ending up feeling surprised by some of the feedback that they received through the evaluation system, and that then propelling into a contentious conversation. And again, I'm going to tell you, I enter into everything with a positive intent. The educator evaluation system is really for everybody to grow. It's a tool for growth, for professional growth, whether you've been in the teaching profession for 1 year or 25 years. There are priority areas for everyone to grow in. You set your goals with your school leadership team. You set a professional practice goal. You set a student learning goal. Those are things teachers have control over and establish themselves. They can work with a team. They can work with their building. But they are, the point of that evaluation is for them to think about how they want to grow and set a goal towards it. Where I find and have found the system fails is when the teacher is not adequately communicated with around areas of improvement along the process. So feedback is put into the tool. I don't know if you use TeachPoint. Is that? Yep.
We do.
So I always told my principals as a building leader, don't be worried when you see TeachPoint. You get an email that pops up and it says feedback has been provided for you. Don't ever worry, because if there is a concern, we'll talk about it first. It'll be, be a conversation. And so when the tool is used in that way, and principals are professionally developed in how to effectively use the tool, it's a successful process for teachers for the most part. They don't always get the feedback that they want to get, but there's opportunity for two-way conversation. There's opportunity for them to demonstrate growth by uploading a different source of evidence to show their leader what maybe they've been talking about. So my answer to the contentious question around evaluation is to use the tool so you don't get there. And that's really, around conversations with leaders and helping teachers understand what the tool is about and what they can expect from their leader in that as information.
This is actually more of a corollary than a follow-up to Earl's question, but how have you personally used the evaluation process to improve performance and motivate teachers, principals, whoever you happen to be motivating at the moment? Mm-hmm. And just also, how do you make sure that when your evaluators that you are overseeing, that they're being consistent and objective and fairly evaluating everybody under their purview?
Okay, so I'm going to start with that because I'm going to ask you to restate the beginning part of the question.
Okay.
But as far as making sure that principals are evaluating consistently across schools is another really important piece for teachers to feel that the process is fair. I've had some teachers in schools, not in my present district, but in other districts, say, I never get evaluated. I only get my one evaluation and that's it. And then I'll have other teachers saying, why is my principal in my room all the time? I get evaluated all the time. I get feedback all the time. So it's important for teachers to have equity in that process as well. So one of the things that I've done as a leader of principals is we actually will talk about and share the feedback that we're giving. So we redact teacher identifying traits and share the print out and share what we have been generating in TeachPoint, so that I can see how maybe you've done an evaluation, somebody's able to see what kind of feedback I'm giving. So you're not only building a kind of toolbox by seeing what your colleagues are doing, but you're understanding the value, and everybody's being accountable to coming to those meetings with evidence of feedback. There's also a tool in TeachPoint that I have as a district manager where I can go in and look at feedback, and it gives me a graph of how many teachers have been evaluated by each principal. So I can see that some principals have provided 40 teachers with feedback, and then look at another principal and say, tell me what's going on with evaluation. You've only generated 4 pieces of feedback in the last 3 months. So kind of being able to have that oversight as well and have those conversations with your building leaders. Tell me the first part again. Can you read the first part?
It's more of personally, what you feel you've done at some point during the evaluation process that you've led to improved performance or motivated teacher or administrator.
Okay. So I think one thing I think transparency. So I'm very honest with my educators, and I would say, when I do offer you feedback, it's going to be balanced. It's never going to be one-sided. There's always something that shines when you're in a classroom. It can be a conversation that a teacher had with a student, a high five, a fabulous bulletin board, an engaging project that's on a table. It's balanced. So teachers appreciate that the tool doesn't just highlight what's not going well, but that it's highlighting things that are really happening in the classroom also. I also give teachers an opportunity to provide, as a principal, I haven't had the opportunity as an assistant superintendent, to provide me feedback. Feedback should go both ways. Just because I'm the leader, there's a lot of things that I can learn and grow from by being evaluated by my staff. So I think that's something they've appreciated. Massachusetts used to offer the TELS survey. I don't know if you remember, but that was really great for principals that used that data. That was really great data to be able to see what your own teachers are saying about your leadership style, the professional development you're providing, the collaborative approach that you have. So I think being in the work also helps teachers see, and that I'm willing to learn, helps build the capacity of using that tool in a positive way.
Thank you.
I can also, I'm just going to add on to that it can also be used in a way where people who are really resistant to change need to be held accountable to that. When things are not going well for kids, there needs to be an opportunity for growth provided through that tool. And then when there's ongoing resistance and you're seeing that kids are not getting what they need, it's a process that can be used in a more formal way as well. So I think documenting what you've done to try to help improve instruction and to get better results for kids, and the resistance, and be able to have some evidence to go into further conversations with teachers in that way too.
This is a long one.
Oh boy.
Bear with me.
Okay.
It's a scenario.
Okay.
So, in your district, a student has complained to the police that he was harassed in the locker room by members of his lacrosse team. The abuse included pushing, hazing, verbal taunting, possibly actions with sexual overtones. The parents of the alleged victim want a criminal complaint issued and investigated. The alleged victim is under 18, and the perpetrators may also be under 18. A local reporter gets wind of the story from a student source inside the school and has some names of involved persons. You've had a mixed relationship with this news source. The reporter contacts the superintendent with some of the following questions. Can you confirm it was the lacrosse team? Where was the adult supervision? Has the school department issued an appropriate mandated reports on the victims? We're told this has happened before, so what can you tell us? If you stonewall us, we'll report that as well, because we think some of the students are not eligible for protection as juvenile sources. What are some of the things you think about as a superintendent, and how do you respond?
Okay, so come back to me if I'm missing certain components of that, but I think the first part of the reaction to the reporter is that we are conducting an investigation, and that's a fair and concise response, because you can't engage in things that are protected by student privacy until appropriately deemed appropriate by your chief of police and by parents. And there are some details that don't surface ever because of student privacy. So I think that's where your relationships with the police department are so important, and being able to have relationships with your town investigators. We have 2 detectives that come to the high school in Marblehead at this time, and other schools that I've worked in, that are responsible for really following up on those kinds of pieces with the team. And so you're really trusting the process. It becomes a collaborative process at that point. Schools, when there are possible criminal implications, it becomes a partnership with you in the town. It comes, you need to make sure that you provide every opportunity for an authentic investigation. We have learned a lot over the last couple of years in Massachusetts specifically, where maybe the communities are reflecting on certain investigations that didn't go as deep as they need to. And so whenever there are allegations, they need to be taken seriously, and investigated. Help me with parts that I haven't quite addressed yet, because I know there's a few.
Well, the main question was, what are some of the things you think about would think about as a superintendent?
Okay.
Dealing with that, not necessarily to answer each of the
Okay.
things. And, how would you envision responding?
Okay. So I think I envision responding with transparency when appropriate. So when there's an ongoing investigation, you have to be careful. You have to be cautious. Until you know what the situation is, you have to really wait to get all of the details and information. What I would think about as a superintendent is what happened. I'd want to know. I'd want to be able to talk to the athletic director. I'd want to know some of those answers. I'd want to know what is supervision looking like in the locker rooms. I'd want to talk with coaches. I'd want to talk with managers, sports managers. I'd want to talk with the high school principal. Anybody associated as that is employed under my employment, I would want to have a conversation with and find out where, if anything, the hardcore facts are and what is still in question. And so I would be able to be strategic in how I got those answers. As superintendents continue to talk about these kinds of things happening in sports situations, in areas in the high school, there are, especially in the athletics, conversations around we'd mentor our teachers, but we don't mentor our coaches. And so coaching, they have a big responsibility. They have students in their care without other adults present. Most of the time they're with kids. So we have to make sure that there's some sort of oversight and training for our coaches. And I know MIAA does a lot of that work, but I think as a district, you need to make sure that your athletic director is asking the right questions in terms of hiring, and you have to make sure that there's some sort of oversight in terms of trying to get to the point where you're not faced with these kinds of things. So what is, what's the situation in the locker room? What is too many kids at one time? What are the protocols that we put in place to protect kids from hazing? And swift and sound consequences for people that are doing things that are not safe in schools. And I'm just going to follow up a little bit, if I can, around transparency. When there are a lot of rumors, it becomes escalated, wherever you are in the investigation. And so as a superintendent, what goes through my mind is what do the parent population need to know right now? And what can I tell them? And how can I help them know what next steps are so that everybody's kind of aware of what's going on about it. Oftentimes the rumors get generated because there's not enough information about the depth of the investigation, the depth of communication between the superintendent. The school committee obviously would be one of the first calls to make sure that you're all aware in the event constituents called you, but I think that would be one of the most important things that I'm thinking about as well, is how to really help parents understand what's happening and how we're moving forward in the process.
Good. Is it okay if I ask another question?
Yeah. Hi.
That was the last of our questions, but we have a few minutes left. And we had
Okay.
another question that didn't make it to the final list,
Great.
but I think it would be a good conversation.
Okay.
So student learning is paramount to the success of any district. With that said, identifying learning targets, measured,
I asked that question.
you did?
Yeah.
Measured student,
But that's
about
okay.
holding accountable? We did ask that? I'm so sorry.
Well, I messed up, so.
So can I add something to that?
Certainly.
Okay, so as far as holding kids holding people accountable,
Oh, yeah.
developing priorities, student achievement.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I found really interesting was the Department of Education completed a comprehensive review for Marlborough in 2019. And, you know, like I've said, taking data from various pieces is what's going to tell a story. No one document, no one site visit is going to tell you everything. But what I found telling, well, I shouldn't say telling, but what I found important is some of the next steps and some of the findings connected. And so there was findings around looking at evidence for academic rigor in classrooms, and maybe that would be a recommendation for the district planning forward, and looking at instructional practices and how do we hold kids to high expectations. So they, in that visit, found that there were inconsistencies across districts and even within schools and departments with the level of expectation and engagement and level of rigor. So I think that would be one place to kind of have a starting conversation with principals or with teachers and kind of unpack what that finding would be or was about.
Great. Thank you. Any other topics? I'd like to hear a little bit more about family engagement and like community engagement. Mm-hmm. What kind of things have you done in the past to engage the community?
Yep.
I mean, we had some previous conversation about, let's say, the business community, that we have a very robust business community here in Marlborough. So engaging.
Yep. So the one thing I will tell you about business partners with schools that I have found is all you have to do is ask. Everybody is at the ready to do what they can for schools, whether it's donating a gift card to a raffle, whether it's to cater a teacher appreciation luncheon, to provide reduced funding for families at a movie theater. I have never had a business say no to something. They want to partner with schools. So I think leaning into those resources and engaging those partners in bringing things for kids is a great thing to do. As far as families and how I have engaged with families, I was talking to our building principals about I don't know, the days kind of blending together, but I was talking to a group today about events, community events, and having families come into schools for fun. Like getting parents to parent-teacher conferences, for some people, is really not a good time. It's not a comfortable place to be. Depending on your own experience, being in a school isn't comfortable. Depending on what your students' behavior or academic achievement is, being in a school might not be comfortable. So inviting families to schools for fun. So we, as an elementary school, used to have a winter carnival, and then we'd have a fall festival. And so it was all fun-based. It was free for families. We partnered with businesses to sponsor. We partnered with our PTO to kind of sponsor as well, and strategically brought in businesses and resources that families might need but don't know how to access. So down one hallway, I would have an application for WIC. I would have the Girl Scouts, so that if you wanted to sign your daughter up for Girl Scouts, you had that opportunity. Same for Boy Scouts. Had a martial arts demonstration and scholarships for martial arts. So parents had access to things that they needed without having, because sometimes parents don't know where to go for that kind of help. We would have our outside partners, counseling agencies that support kids with counseling in schools, in the building for that night. So if my child was getting in-school counseling by an outside provider, Maybe I've never met them because they meet from 11 to 12 every day or once a week. So this was an opportunity for a family or a student to bring their parent to their counselor and say, this is the person that I meet with once a week. So trying to make a fun night for families to come and engage with staff in a positive way, but also being strategic about what do our families need from us and making it ready for them to be able to access when they're there.
Great, thank you. Any other follow-ups? No? We have just a couple minutes. Any last-minute things you want to tell us?
Well, I think, I appreciate the amount of time that I've been able to have with all of you. I feel like whether we toured a building today, whether we engaged in some delightful dinner meals, I appreciate that we've been able to kind of get to know each other a little bit more beyond just a quick interview. But I do just have a little bit of a closing statement just to tell you.
Sure.
So in kind of thinking about the superintendency and what kind of skill sets you may be looking for, I did a Google search and I put in the question, essential skills for effective superintendent of schools. And these are the indicators that popped up. Ability to aspire staff, experience with development and implementation of curriculum, success in achieving high expectations and outcomes for all students, strategic thinker and problem solver, ability to demonstrate flexibility, sense of humor, excellent communication skills, both an active listener and articulate, a team player, strong collaboration skills, able to build positive relationships with stakeholders across the community, sound fiscal management practices, understanding of special education students and families, and able to recruit, retain, and build capacity of educators. I'm going to add to that the commitment to facilitating a healthy pandemic recovery, which will include the return to joy, innovation, and excitement across the Marlborough teaching and learning community. So I hope over my time with you today and my time with staff and parents and principals that I've been able to demonstrate in one way or another that I come to you with some of these established effective skills for superintendency and leave you with a quote that's out of Harvard that I just love about schools in general. And when you're thinking about transition, respect the past, honor the present, and build the future. And so I hope to be able to bring all three of those pieces to the superintendency in your district. So again, thank you for a great day, a great meal, and I appreciate the time you've spent with me tonight.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we will take a recess and regroup until our next candidate is ready.